Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. This is Chris. I'm here with Justin, and for the second week in a row, we have a very special interview. Our guest this week is the lead singer and guitar master, Mr. Danny Estrin from Voyager, here to talk to us about the uniVers album. Danny, welcome to the Metal Exchange. How are you today?
I'm very, very good and very excited to talk about an album that I have not talked about for quite some time.
We were just talking a little while ago via text about how little we know about the creation of this album and kind of what surrounded it. And so I think it'll be interesting to hear about it. We both agreed that it was like one of the albums or maybe the album that really brought Voyager to our attention as a very serious band. And I had told the story about how, like, when I heard the song Cross the Line, that's when I knew I was going to be a fan of the band. And then when we saw you guys live at your first USA show at Prague Power, or really, I guess your second USA show after Justin's birthday extravaganza in Brooklyn, that's when I just, I went from liking the band to loving the band, just like it was like overnight for me. So, I guess we just kind of start out with the first question I'm going to ask is what kind of feedback did you get regarding your first album, Element 5, and after that feedback was received, what was your plan in working on a follow-up album, and what did you kind of want to do after Element 5?
Yeah, interesting. Look, Element 5 or Element V, as people call it, was the first try at something that actually ended up getting moderate to significant success, and it brought us to signing with the Dutch label DVS Records. I think Element V was very much a sign of what I was listening to at the time, which was very heavily power metal oriented. You know, there was a lot of Gamma Ray, Freedom Call, Virgin Steel, that sort of stuff. So, it had some beginnings of what I think the modern Voyager now sounds like. But it was very playful, it was very experimental, and it was just, it was something, it was fun. And we tried it out, and we didn't really have huge expectations. So when we got a reasonable degree of success and were invited to Europe and invited to play, we thought, okay, there's something there. And then I think with uniVers, we realized that, something that we have, while we have this sort of fun element, we don't take ourselves too seriously as people, we have this sort of uplifting melancholy, which goes throughout a lot of, certainly the songs that I write. And given that me and Simone are the only two members that feature on that album that are still in the band, it's one of those things where we really wanted to explore songwriting in a little bit more depth and a little bit more melancholy. And I think while some of that sort of power metal fun is still there, especially with songs like White Shadow, it's a little bit more introspective, and it's a little bit more, I think, of that uplifting melancholy that Voyager has seen right to this very day.
Had your musical tastes changed between 2004 and the writing of this album? Because like you said, you were listening to a lot of power metal, I guess, in the early 2000s. But as you kind of evolved into this second release, had your tastes changed, or did you just want to incorporate different elements into the music?
Yeah, I mean, we never really set out to write a certain album of a certain style, because at that time I was, I guess, writing most of the songs, and the rest of the band was kind of just putting a musical skeleton and making into a human being. It was very much a reflection of what I was listening to. So when Element V was very much, your Stradivarius, this was a little bit more of, the maybe slightly more gothic stuff. There was stuff like 69 Eyes, Typo Negative sort of keeps creeping into a lot of the albums, generally with Voyager. And I think so. I think I was listening to a lot more melodic, more introspective stuff. Particularly around that time, I think I was listening to a lot of the psychedelic band called Osric Tentacles, which I don't think made its way into the album. But there was a lot of that I think I was experimenting a lot with different kinds of styles of music. I was always been a big fan of sort of, a lot of ethnic music. It'd be like Turkish music or Indian music or that sort of stuff. So my horizons were very, very broad. But I think that the constant's always been this sort of melancholy, which I think Typo Negative has achieved. And I think I was probably listening to a lot of that at the time.
Yeah, I think that resonates clearly, just because I reference Typo Negative a lot when I listen to this album, not just with some of your vocal lines, but just some of the keyboard overtones and like kind of like the slow broodingness of some of it. I guess the second question that I had was really regarding the production, because as good as the first album is, I think that this album was really a step up just in the overall production, and obviously that would continue throughout the rest of the discography. Did you make a concerted effort to really like amp up the sound on this record?
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good point, especially in Perth where we are, which is the arse end of the world, really, if you think about it. There wasn't a lot of sort of polished melodic metal happening at the time, and especially production-wise. There was a lot of death and grind, and in fact, in our little bubble of metal, we used to not really get shows with any bands that were melodic. There was maybe one or two at a keyboard. It was like, oh, what do you mean this band has a keyboard? Gross, well, that's not metal. And so we would end up playing with a lot of kind of like, I don't know, grindcore and death metal and black metal bands and things like that. And when we decided after the interesting sandwich of mix and mastering that Element V was, Element 5, we really wanted to do something that was a little bit more polished, I think, especially for Perth. So when we went into the studio with Aidan, who is still our sound guy, but he's our live sound guy to this very day, and he probably understands the beginnings of Voyager better than anyone, we really wanted to make something that especially Perth had not heard before. So on a world scale, I think it probably didn't match up to some of the releases at the time, but certainly from an Australian perspective, when people heard that album, one of the comments was, "Oh, this sounds like an album that you would buy at the shops," and I think that was one of the biggest flatteries to us in that time, because people had never heard something that was polished like that. Certainly not in Australia and as a local production.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm glad that you mentioned Aidan, because I had mentioned him in our uniVers episode because I got to meet him in Atlanta, and he's such a sweet guy. But we were talking. He came into our hotel room, and we were just like feeding him Yinglings. He was loving his American beer experience, and we were talking about how you guys were playing all of I Am the Revolution at Prog Power, and we were talking about how we had voted for you guys to play uniVers because we always thought so highly of the album, and his eyes lit up when we brought up uniVers. He was like, "Oh, this album doesn't get enough love. Like, I love this album. I love Element 5. Like, those two albums. Like, it was cool talking to somebody who was there in the beginning, and especially because, like you said, you and Sim were the only ones in the band for this album, and I think you were the only one left from the first album. So, yeah, it was. I'm glad you brought up Aidan. He's such a great dude. But I wanted to. Oh, go ahead.
So no, he's awesome. He's and look, a lot of fun times recording with him. And while he doesn't do our albums anymore, that live sound that he pulls, which he really does understand what the band was about and its very beginnings. But there are some hilarious stories about those uniVers recording sessions. Aidan gets frustrated, or used to get a lot more frustrated than he does. He's chilled out a bit, but there was times when he would I think there was one moment where he got so frustrated with a particular, I don't know, it was probably a computer issue, that he slammed his fist on the desk so hard that in fact it shattered the desk, and he landed under the table, and Pro Tools that was on top of him, and we had to get him out. So it was an experimentation for everyone. Nobody had really done this sort of recording before. We did it at Aidan's house with different rooms and things like that. So it was home recording with a professional edge at its very best. We've obviously come a long way from that, but it was certainly fun.
Awesome. So you mentioned a little bit of the kind of the critical response to the album as far as the production goes. What was the response that you received as far as musically? Like, how was the album received in comparison to your debut album?
I think it was a step up, and the press from around the world realized that, hey, this is not just a one-off. This is a band which is evolving musically, and certainly the prog community was, I think, very excited about the release, because that sort of brooding melancholy was, I think, something that not a lot of bands were doing. There was a lot of, in the prog scene, there was a lot of notes, there was a lot of odd time signatures, and a lot of very long songs. But I think what resonated with people, and again, one of the reasons why some people think we're not prog, is because it was all about songs. It was about song structure and about melody and about catchiness, which is, I think, difficult to find and is underrated. And I think from there on, really, we focused more and more on the songwriting aspect, on realizing that I had an ability to write pretty catchy stuff, and that was a strength. And it was internationally extremely well received, and I think it really brought us into the realm of, hey, this is a serious band. And I actually agree. I think if I listen to this, I don't cringe. There's a certain old albums that I listen to and I go, I simply cannot stand this. But as a self-critical person, but uniVers is one where I go, yeah, this is pretty cool. Sometimes I even think, hey, we should re-record some of these songs.
I couldn't agree more.
We'd be okay with that.
Just because I would love to hear the new members and all the influence that they would bring to some of these tracks, because obviously 60% of the band isn't in the band anymore.
Yep.
The word I like to use is accessibility, and I always thought that this was a very accessible album, even for non-metal fans or non-prog fans. They can listen to this album and say, wow, this is some really catchy songs. And I think that that's what separated this from the debut, just because you could put it on somebody who's not in the community, if you will, puts this on and just automatically says, wow, I can listen to this. This is catchy stuff.
It was very popular with mothers of people who were into prog. Who were like, it's not so bad. This is pretty good. I can listen to this. So metal that your mum can listen to is possibly not the best catchphrase, but I'm happy with that.
Talk about good marketing right there.
T-shirt.
When you were, and correct me if I'm wrong, did you write basically the framework for all these songs, or did Sim help you with a lot of this stuff as well? Or tell me a little bit about the songwriting process.
Certainly at the time, it was probably the first 3 albums. It was mainly me writing pretty much everything, and then I would write the song, and then the band members, as I said, would put their little flair on it. So the songwriting process was very much unilateral. Simone was quite new in the band. She certainly put her touch to it, but in terms of actual songwriting, I think she only started getting involved a lot later. So this is very much a me album in most ways, which some people like, some people don't. I think it's funny because when Scott joined the band, and we went to Meaning of Iron and albums like that, we became a lot more sort of groove oriented. He brought that sort of that groove and that heaviness, which I wasn't really able to pull. I never grew up with groove stuff. I was never into Rage Against the Machine. I was never into Pantera. I grew up with classical music, and I think that shows very much on the first couple of albums because it was very much classically influenced. Now that I think of it, one of the huge influences around that time was Royal Hunt and Paradox. That album I was listening to on rotation, and I got very, very excited when I could see the whole album live at Prog Power. So that really that sort of melodic neoclassical, warm, beautiful sound that was still heavy. That's what I wanted to bring across in uniVers.
That's always been the type of prog music that I've always been drawn to, because me and Justin are now more than 50 episodes deep into this podcast where we've been reviewing, albums, and kind of the more of the technical meandering kind of prog is hard for me to kind of get into without listening to it a lot, over and over again. Whereas like, Paradox was like one of my first loves in prog, and listening to Voyager for the first time, it was so easy. And I think Justin mentioned it too in the previous episode, that it's so catchy that you can like it immediately, and you like it, and you want to hear it again without having to listen to it over and over again. And I said that, like, I think that Voyager's newer stuff is a little bit more on the proggy kind of technical element, where I have to listen to it more than once to really appreciate it. Whereas I think like some of these older songs, like I just remember hearing Cross the Line and White Shadow just like one time, and it was like love at first listen. So
that's really interesting. That's really interesting you should say that, because a lot of people have the opposite experience. They say your new stuff is very catchy. It's pop on top very clearly, and I can listen to it and get into it straight away. And then they go, if I want to listen to it on a deeper level, there's stuff going on underneath that's quite complex. Whereas they find that a lot of the older stuff they struggle with, because it's not that immediate. When you listen to hyperventilators, I'm hyperventilating. It's like, wow, I can sing along to that straight away. Whereas the older stuff was more intricate to play. And I think we noticed that shift between that real emphasis on melody and that initial melody line towards the more groove-oriented stuff with the sort of pop elements of the later album. So it's really interesting that you guys should say that.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me, because as much as the newer material is great, and it's stuff that we go back to all the time, I find that if I just want to I call it an easy listen, something that I don't have to really think as much about, I always go back to this album and I Am the Revolution. One of the things that I noticed is that there really was I Am the Revolution. There's an evolution for you guys with each album, and I think that although it's obviously has that signature Voyager sound, I also think that it's each album is very, very separate and distinct from the last, and that you could, if you didn't know the band or the discography, you could pick a song and you would kind of know which time period it was coming from if you had never heard the rest of the album.
For sure. But to me, I think that's such a beautiful thing, because, and I think that's progress. Why? And I think, when we did our live stream, sort of mentioned in the comments, well, why would we do the same album 16 times?
Absolutely.
Look at a band like Nightwish, fantastic band, and they're a lot richer than we are, but they do the same thing over and over again with slight variations, and that works for them. That's great. People love it. But at the same time, I would get bored as a musician doing that. And I think the most wonderful thing is when you meet people and go, man, I followed you guys from the very beginning right till now. I love elements of what you do. Yes, I like the old stuff better, or I like the new stuff better. But as a band, you've evolved, and that's so flattering to me, because there's nothing I hate more than seeing a band that's 20 years ago that was doing the same stuff. I'm like, come on, guys. Where's are you not growing as human beings? Like, it's just boring.
It's formulaic. It becomes very like paint by numbers for a lot of groups, and clearly Voyager is not doing that, and I think that's part of the allure. You guys had a tremendous response, and again, I guess we're not going to go into too much detail on the newer albums, just because obviously our focus was on uniVers. But I will say that even a lot of major publications like Prog Magazine in the UK, they just had glowing reviews because of the evolution that you spoke about.
Yeah, for sure, and that's really, really good to hear. I don't know. I get sad when it's the same. I really do, and I think it's sad that sells well, because look at Iron Maiden. I mean, fantastic band and hugely successful, but are they doing something innovative? No, they're not. And that's why I don't particularly like, to be honest, a band like Opeth. I don't really like their music that much, but I respect them greatly, because they've said, screw this, we're going to do what we want to do. And if it's 70s prog, well, if you don't like it, that's cool. That's what we're doing. And they've still managed to be extremely successful and make a living out of it. So kudos to them, because that takes guts. It would have been very, very easy for them to go along the same pathways they did before, with the growls and the crazy song structures, and done exactly the same thing, but they didn't.
that we talk about things like that quite a bit on the show, just about I think of like conversations I've had personally with metal fans, and there's like people that love the change. Like there's people, Opeth being a great example, Pain of Salvation's another band I think of, where, you know, I have friends that love everything that they do as much as things change. And then there's other people that are just like, they want to hear 40 versions of Remedy Lane or you know, Blackwater Park. And I think it's even funny, like even a very well-known band, like even Pearl Jam, we discussed their first album 10 a few episodes ago, and Pearl Jam's changed a lot over the years. And we were talking about how there was kind of like a drop off even in their fan base after the first, you know, 2 or 3 albums, just because people, I guess people just have short attention spans. And I don't think that they handle it well when like a band that they love that made maybe 1 or 2 albums decides that they're going to like change their style or just do something a little bit different. That one of the reasons I love Voyager is because each album kind of has its own flavor. Like, oh, I'm in the mood for this kind of album, so I'm going to play this. Or I find myself like picking random Voyager albums depending on what kind of mood I'm in, and that kind of leads me to my next question. Getting back to uniVers specifically, you know, we picked up on when we were discussing this that there were elements of new wave and elements of black metal and elements of typo negative, like you mentioned before. Clearly, these were all like influencing you as a songwriter. Did you decide, like, screw it, I'm just going to throw it all into the pot and just mix it all together and see what happens? Like, it just seems like you didn't hold back on letting all of your influences kind of just flow right into this album.
No, for sure. And I think at that time I was just writing stuff that just came to me. You know, we as a band, I think, have never sat down and gone, oh, we want to write this type of song or we want to write that type of song. You know, I'm sitting there at the piano or at the keyboard just noodling on a riff or a little lick, and I go, okay, that works well. That's a melody line that I like. I could be sitting in the shower and you know, go, okay, that's cool. Let's record that. You know, so it doesn't really. I don't really think, oh, this sounds like typo negative, or this sounds like, you know, whatever it is. It just comes out and happens to sound like something. Possibly with the exception of Between the Sheets, which is that wonderful interlude, which was very, very purposely typo negative inspired. You know, I even sort of changed the way of singing a little bit to sort of mimic Pete Steele. But yeah, I don't think I ever set out to do a particular style. And I think the styles are quite varied. If you compare a song like, you know, One More Time to Pulse 04, Pulse 04 was very much a nod to the old, you know, power metal type stuff. You know, we don't really do that much of that kind of stuff anymore. But I wanted to make it also transitional because I still loved that power metal stuff at the time. It wasn't that I'd stopped liking it, but I think my mood has always been drawn to that melancholy, and I think that's what we do best.
I'm going to pick your brain for a little bit and see if you remember the songwriting process in terms of how the album came together. Obviously, there were 11 tracks, very distinct from one another, let alone, you know, the rest of the discography. Do you remember what the first song that you wrote was, and was there kind of like a cornerstone for the album and it just expanded from there? Or if you remember, I know we're going back a ways.
I probably remember it was probably Pulse 04 that came. It was sort of immediately after Element V, which was, you know, it's a natural transition. It's very power metal driven, and then probably Cross the Line and songs like that. White Shadow was honestly a bit of fun that we just sort of threw in there, and it's just become this hilarious epic song that people request at every show. And you know, I used to hate it, but now I love playing it because it's so much fun, and people just go nuts for it. And then there was Sober was pretty much one of the poppiest numbers on there, and I don't know, to me that song. I think that song came after I'd got all the power metal out of my system, and you know, it was time to write something a bit more introspective and a bit more somber. And you at the time I was still young. I was melancholic, relationships, all this sort of stuff, in search of meaning, which, I'm pretty sure I've found myself reasonably well these days. But, those years can be troubling. First, second, third loves, all that sort of stuff. So a lot of that just was just jammed into the lyrical content, but not to the exclusion of the melody. And the melody and the phrasing is really what it's all about. The melody always comes first, and then I think, what emotion does this convey? Okay, so the melody sounds like something sad or something introspective or something, where you're searching for something, whatever. And then the lyrics always come around the vocals. I cannot stand bands who write lyrics and then that they've just crammed 4 verses of lyrics into like one stand. It doesn't make any sense, and the words don't flow well, and it's not. So some of the words might be a bit weird, or some of the phrasing might be a bit strange. That's because the melody takes precedence. It's all about the melody.
I'm so glad that you brought up sober, because that was the next thing I was going to ask you about. So I kind of told an anecdote on the previous episode about how I resonated with the lyrical content of this song, and I kind of wanted to get your perspective on what the song means, because at the time that I was listening to it, I was in a situation where I was seeing somebody where one person was more into it than the other, and it was like hot and heavy after a few drinks, but then when everything cooled off and everybody was sober, one of us was kind of like, okay, you can go home now. And that's kind of like what I got from it in I guess maybe a more crude sense than the way you put it more poetically in the song. Is that kind of what you were kind of getting at with that?
100%. And look, it's probably from personal experience. It's very difficult when you're in a situation where you like a person and you want to feel more, and it's just not coming. It's just not there. And you desperately want it to be there, and you desperately want to have that feeling, and you try, and you really try. And whether you try to solve that temporarily with alcohol or whatever, it just doesn't work. And with that, I think comes a lot of that guilt and a lot of that shame. So I think, the lyrics are pretty self-explanatory. That's exactly what it was about. Having said that, other people have interpreted it in different ways. I know of 2 or 3 people who really interpreted that towards, an addiction to alcohol or an issue with alcohol. And in fact, they said to me, that song made me sober. And that's such a cool thing to hear. And that's such a wonderful thing when and I remember especially around uniVers, because a lot of the lyrics are quite, they're quite introspective. Same thing with Meaning of I get a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, but a few letters here and there, and mail from fans who were like, dude, this helped me, this song or this album helped me so much through something, whether it was, I remember this one young kid was saying it helped him through school, bullying and things like that. And I was like, that is so cool. I never set out to do any of that. But the fact that someone has written to me and I've made an impact and I've changed something about their life in a positive way, that's so much more than you can ever ask for as a musician. So it's quite phenomenal. But anyway, I digress. Yes, that song is literally about liking someone but not loving them and feeling really bad about it.
Well, I usually am pretty bad at understanding lyrics most of the time. Half the time I listen to bands where I don't even understand what they're singing. Rhapsody. But I'm glad that I got that one right. That song also was your first music video, correct?
Oh God, yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay, so why don't we talk about that a little bit? Go ahead.
Look, we gave it a shot. There was. If I see it now, I just kind of think, well, that's it was good for its time. I mean, it kind of, when I watch it now, I kind of think it's a little creepy. Like I'm just watching this girl in her bedroom while she's sleeping. It's bizarre. The funny thing is that's obviously now my wife, and I have children with this woman, and the park that we shot it in is the park that's very close to my house. So it all kind of came full circle. I don't know. Music videos are one of those things where you just You do what you think is right at the time, and sometimes it ages well, and sometimes it doesn't. Like, some TV shows age really well, and you watch them now, yeah, that's still funny, and then you watch like Scrubs, and you're like, this is bad. This is not good at all. So that happened. I don't know what else do you want to know.
No, I mean, if that's all you got to say. I was impressed that you guys really went for it instead of just throwing up a green screen and standing in the studio and just playing. Like, you guys, for a first video, it's like, let's just try to make something story driven, and so I thought that was admirable for a first video. So I mean,
thank you. I'll take admirable is a good word for that. Yeah.
I mean, come on, like, think about some of the music videos from the 80s. Like, this is probably going to age much better than some of those 80s music videos.
I'm not sure, but I'll tell you one day when my daughter is old enough, I'm going to show her, and she's going to be like, "Why are there two of you, and why is Mum in this video?" She's going to understand what's going on. So it's my gift to my children.
Yeah,
there you go.
It may age well, but I wouldn't show the kids. I'll just leave it at that. Just some things are better left unsaid, and hopefully they don't discover YouTube at any time in the near future.
Oh, but I
digress. Going back just to like a live setting, obviously on the new Voyage Through Time, you guys selected two songs. Obviously, you selected Sober and White Shadow. Yeah. Was any inspiration given to any of the other tracks? Chris and I have talked about, some of those old Voyager shows, and personally, I guess, we have just wanted to hear songs like Cross the Line live, and we really haven't heard some of those. Is that a conscious decision, or are you just kind of going with some of was this more of like a decision to play the hits for this, massive effort on the new concert?
Yeah, it's really hard when you've got 7 albums and you can only play 2 songs from each album. There's going to be some unhappy people everywhere. So we, in the Voyager Facebook fan group, the whole idea came about people sort of voting for, their favourite songs and whatever. And that was the majority of the inspiration. Sober and White Shadow are requested probably the most. I would have loved to have played Cross the Line. I think it's a fantastic song. I would really like to play something like Ever Waiting, which in fact we've never played live. One More Time we've never played live. What I Need we've never played live. Falling we've actually never played live. So there's a lot of songs which I would really like to play live. So perhaps the next time we come to Prog Power and we do a midweek mayhem show, it can be uniVers, not I Am the Revolution, which I have to say was one of the scariest things I've ever done, playing the whole album from, it was like, that was a bad idea.
I'm not sure how Milton convinced you of that, but somehow it worked for us, even if it was terrifying for you guys.
Musicians are always their biggest critics, and we were out in the crowd, like, crapping ourselves that we were hearing, Total Existence Failure and Straight to the Other Side. Like, and we also kind of accepted the fact that, like, we may be the only people that ever get to hear some of these songs live. So I thought it was super cool and a really special experience. I know that I think I spoke to a number of you that night, and you all were like, "We're never doing that again."
But we will do uniVers, sure.
Okay, yes. Well, I'm going to hold you to that. I'm actually going to text Milton right now and let him know that Danny has agreed that at Prog Power, whenever the pandemic ends, which who knows. That uniVers is going to happen, so that's great. And then that'll be your first set, and then the second set you'll do all the hits. So
exactly.
We'll keep you busy.
That's exactly what we'll do when the pandemic ends. So we'll see you in 2055.
Well, it's starting to feel that way.
Yep.
We'll still hold you to it because Justin will tell you I don't forget anything.
Oh God.
Well, we obviously want to thank you there. I want to just, I guess, give you an opportunity to kind of plug some of the things that you guys are working on in the future and where people can find you, because even though I think a lot of people that listen to us are fans of the band, there are people that are discovering you for the first time. So why don't you just tell us or tell everyone, where they can find you guys and what they can look forward to in the short term.
Brilliant. Yeah. So we've just released A Voyage Through Time, which is probably one of the most ambitious things we've done for a while. Certainly within the scope of the global travel restrictions, i.e. we cannot leave Australia at all. In fact, we can't leave our state. But we are working on a new album, which scarily will be album number 8. We are in talks with Eurovision. We're trying to get into the Australia Decides for Eurovision. So that will hopefully happen at some point. But certainly the new music is flowing very well. We're having writing sessions pretty much every week. It's really, really exciting. It's really fun, and it is probably more collaborative than it's ever been. And I think the most exciting thing is that this lineup has been so stable now that for such a long time that we have really that Voyager sound was cemented. I think probably around, I would say probably the meaning of I and sort of, onwards. And whatever we do, it's going to be still 100% Voyager. And I really hope that both the old fans and the new fans will find something that they will love. But I have a question for you guys.
Uh-oh.
Why? As people who have seen, I guess, our trajectory from the early stages, I don't know when you guys started listening to us. Do you feel that when you go back, because when I discover a new band, I listen to the latest stuff and then I go back, and usually when I go backwards, I go, "Ooh, I'm not sure if I like the production or I like it at all," because I'm used to that standard of now. How do you guys see it? Do you guys cringe? Do you guys go, "Oh, well, I think that album could have been produced better or could have sounded better, or I wish I could hear this album in a different way or in a different light"? Or are you happy with the product that was released at that particular time and you see it as that and nothing more?
See, that's a great question. Normally when it's a band that I discover later on in their career, I kind of go back and I appreciate the older stuff for what it is. But when it comes to Voyager, I heard Element 5 shortly after it came out. So I've kind of been on board since the beginning. So I've seen the evolution over the 7, soon to be 8 albums. So I never look back and say, "Oh, I wish this was different." I kind of look back and just enjoy it for what it was, because I remember when I heard it for the first time.
Yeah.
And it's obviously no different with uniVers. There are other bands, though. I think of even 70s prog bands. I recently started listening to some of this Yes stuff, which I had just never heard of. And so I'm going back to the early 70s. And then I had difficulty figuring out which mix to listen to, because Steven Wilson, I think, remixed half their catalog. And do I listen to the original recording, or do I listen to, some of these remastered, remixed versions? I didn't know what to do. So I kind of just dive in, and whatever grabs me. But I don't as much as I enjoy these first couple of albums, I don't see a need to necessarily go back and re-record the whole thing, even though I think the songs are great, because I have that nostalgia factor. By the same token, I would love to see this stuff incorporated live, because to your point, some of this stuff has never seen the light of day live.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Chris, what about you?
I definitely agree with what Justin had to say in a macro sense. As far as Voyager specifically, it's kind of the same. Like when I first started listening to Voyager, there were literally 3 Voyager albums to choose from. So I listened to all 3 repetitively. And I even going into this week and listening to uniVers again for the first time all the way through in a while, it made me want to listen to Element 5 and I Am the Revolution again, which I did a couple of times. And man, I think I like Element 5 a little bit more every time I listen to it. I think the fact that it does sound a little bit raw and it is like an earlier representation of the band actually is kind of what makes it charming, in that that's where you were at the time and that's what you were capable of doing. And what I think what matters is the melodies and the songwriting are so strong that that's what carries the day, I think. And I just want to say, I watched the concert last week or the week before, and when you guys busted out 11th Meridian, I was on my couch with my friends with a beer in my hand, jumping up and down, screaming like, I can't believe they're playing this song. I was so excited because I get so excited like when I hear some of these songs that from my early time as a fan of the band. Like, and you know, same thing. If we ever saw you guys live and you played Cross the Line, like you would see this 6'4" idiot, like just jumping up and down like a fool. So I agree with Justin. Like, I don't feel like these kind of things need to be like touched up or re-recorded or anything like that, because I think that they're a place in time and they exist for a reason. And you know, like it's funny. Like I kind of go back and forth. Like a band like Halloween that like remixed some songs from the Keeper era, and you know they redid like Dr. Steen, and it's like this super polished thing, and I loved it at the time when it was first remixed, and then I went back and listened to the original, and I'm kind of like, damn, you know, this is the version I remember, and now I think I actually prefer the original over the touched up version. So, I mean, that's just a small example of kind of where my head's at. But I mean, as far as Voyager goes, like I feel like each album is exactly the way it needed to be at that time. And it's all part of the evolution of the band. And, I mean, I wouldn't change a thing. I enjoyed so much going back and listening to uniVers again, which is an album I always loved. And I think that listening to it again and really paying more attention to some of the songs that I may have passed up because I was waiting to listen to Cross the Line or White Shadow or Pulse 04, and realizing how much I really like Higher Existence and Ever Waiting and Deep Weeds. I mean, this is such a hearty album.
It's so interesting because the things that you're saying now, the new in inverted commas new members of Voyager are discovering that as well. Like Ash really hadn't heard that much of uniVers, and Alex remembers uniVers as a fan, and so he's just, you know, he listens to some of these songs and goes, yeah, we should definitely play this, and I love playing this, and I love what that meant to me at the time. So it's really interesting that you've got the band discovering or rediscovering some of these tracks as well. And I guess you get to a point in your career where, you know, you're almost 8 albums in where you go, let's look at some of the earlier stuff. Maybe it wasn't so bad.
I'd be curious to hear from somebody who maybe got into Voyager with Ghost Mile or Colors in the Sun and then went back and listened to the older stuff and what they think of Element 5 and uniVers and I Am the Revolution. But like Justin said, we kind of got in on the ground floor.
You did, and that's why your experience may be different to those who get into us now and then work backwards. You know, and I get that experience when I find a band now, and then I go, "That's really cool." And I listen to the album that was 10 years ago, and I go, "This sounds horrendous. I can't even listen to this." Whereas I didn't follow the band's progress from the very beginning. Had I done that, maybe I would have enjoyed the entire back catalogue. So maybe there is some merit in re-recording and re-releasing things in a different kind of format, but it's really all about that personal experience.
Just to wrap things up, I know this is like the dreaded question for all musicians, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is there a favorite song of yours on this album? Is there something that just transcends time for you, that it just is always going to be something that you hold near and dear to your heart? Or is it just kind of more of the whole album on a whole? I mean, I know you guys probably hate when people ask you what's your favorite song, but what's your favorite song?
It's definitely not White Shadow, I can tell you that.
Well, that's my favorite, so.
I really like Deep Weeds. I think it's a really different song. It's a song that I'm a terrible guitarist. Fun fact, I started out playing guitar in Voyager very poorly, and then I switched to keyboard because I realized I was a terrible guitarist. But Deep Weeds is a song that I wrote on guitar as best as I could back in the day, and I think it's really cool. I think it's really different, and when I put this album on, I'm immediately drawn to that because I don't know, there's something organic and warm and beautiful about that song. So that would probably be my pick. That
was almost Justin's track of the week. Actually, we were talking about it in the previous episode that Justin made me a playlist in 2011 getting ready for Prog Power, and that was the song he chose to represent Voyager at that time when there were 3 albums to choose from. So I think that speaks highly of that song.
Wow, that's so cool.
Well,
so, I guess
thank you so much for your time. Yeah, we want to thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure going back down this little journey and back down the rabbit hole with you. Stay safe, and we'll catch you when live shows are a thing again. And obviously, we look forward to the 8th release whenever it's going to come out.
Thank you so much. One final comment, if I may, is
Sure.
that the fact that you guys, and I know, and it's one of these things. I know you guys dissect the music and are so into it, and that is such an enviable thing as a musician. There are so many people. I remember speaking to a guy recently who was a very successful band who played all the festivals and were on radio and all that sort of stuff, and he said, "Man, I'm so jealous of you because you have people on forums, you've got people on podcasts who are dissecting your music, just loving everything that you do. Whereas with us, it's just some 15-year-old coming up to us going, I heard your song on the radio, I love it." And then they forget about you 2 seconds later, So the fact that you guys dissect this and are so into it, that's what it gives me such a warm and fuzzy feeling. So thank you.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure.
Yeah, that means a lot to us to hear you say that.
Catch you on the other side.
Take care, Danny.
See you guys. Bye.